There is a voice. You have never heard it, not with your physical ears, not in any room you have ever sat in, but every person in this video has heard a version of it. The still, small voice after the storm. The sudden certainty in a dark season. The sense, in the worst moment of your life, that something or someone just said your name. In the pages of the Gospel accounts, 3 people heard that voice at close range. 3 people who were, by every medical and cultural standard of their time, completely and irreversibly dead. And every single one of them did the same thing. They got up. We will get to that moment, but not yet. Because before you can understand what it means that Jesus raised the dead, you need to understand the people he raised. Their names, their faces, the rooms they died in, the people who loved them. Because these are not theological propositions, these are human beings, and Jesus knew every one of them by name. The first story begins with a man falling on his face in the dirt. His name is Jairus, and if you had lived in first-century Galilee, you would have recognized that name. Jairus is the ruler of the local synagogue, which means he is not a nobody. He is the man who controls access to the most important building in the community. He decides who reads scripture on the Sabbath. He decides who gets the seat of honor. He is respected. He is watched. He is, in the social architecture of his world, the kind of man who does not kneel in public. And yet here he is, in the dirt, at the feet of a Galilean rabbi whose theology makes the Pharisees nervous. He does not care about any of that today. His daughter is dying. She is 12 years old. Jairus has known her face for 12 years, the full arc of her life, every scraped knee, every first word, every laugh. And now she is on a mat at home with her eyes closed and her breathing shallow, and her father has run out of options and run out of dignity, and the only thing he has left is this. He will kneel before anyone at all, if there is any chance they can help her. Jesus does not hesitate. He goes. But here is what the Gospel of Mark wants you to notice. The crowd goes too. And crowds in the ancient world do not move quietly. They press, they push, they talk over each other. And Jesus is in the middle of this slow, noisy, crushing procession, moving toward a dying girl. When a messenger arrives from Jairus' house, the words land like stones. Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher any further. Think about what it costs to hear that sentence. 12 years of her face, 12 years of her voice, and now this stranger standing in the road telling you it is over. And there is a rabbi standing next to you who was supposed to fix this, and you ran out of time. The crowd was too thick, and she is gone. Jesus turns to Jairus. Here's what most people miss about what he says next. He does not offer comfort in the way we might expect. He does not say, "I am so sorry," or "She is in a better place." He says 5 words that are, by any rational standard, absurd. Do not fear, only believe. Only believe. As if belief is a switch you can flip while your daughter's body is getting cold. As if faith is easy when the messenger is still standing in the road and the crowd is watching, and you are a synagogue ruler who is supposed to have all of this figured out already. But Jairus keeps walking. And that silent, gutted, tear-stained act of continuing to walk is one of the most profound acts of faith in the entire gospel narrative. When they arrive at the house, the professional mourners are already there. This was standard practice in the ancient world. You hired people to weep loudly, to play flutes, to make the community aware that death had visited this home. The noise would have been immediate and overwhelming. Jesus walks in and says something that makes the crowd laugh. The girl is not dead, she is sleeping. The Greek word used for their response is katagaleo. It means mocking, derisive laughter. Not nervous laughter, not polite skepticism. These are people who have seen enough death to know it when they see it. And they think this rabbi from Nazareth has just said the most naive thing they have ever heard. Jesus puts them all outside. He takes the girl's mother and father, and Peter, James, and John, and he goes into the room where she is lying. And he does something remarkable. He does not pray loudly. He does not perform. He does not speak in Hebrew or Greek. He speaks Aramaic. Talitha cum, little girl, get up. Aramaic was the everyday street language of Galilee. It was the language her mother sang to her, the language her father called her name in. Jesus chose it deliberately, not the formal language of the temple, not the language of theology and distance. He spoke the language of her home, the language of warmth, the language she had heard every day of her 12-year life. And she got up. She got up and she walked. And Jesus, in one of the most quietly human details in all 4 Gospels, told them to give her something to eat. She just came back from the dead, and Jesus is worried about whether she has had lunch. That detail should stop you, because it tells you everything about who he is. This is not a God of dramatic exits. This is a God who stays in the room after the miracle, who thinks about the next 5 minutes of your life, who knows you just came back from somewhere far away and your body is confused, and you need bread, and you need water, and you need your mother's hands. He saw her fully, even after death. The second story has no request in it. Nobody sent for Jesus. Nobody knelt in the dirt. Nobody ran through a crowd to find him. There is no desperate father, no synagogue ruler, no powerful man trading his dignity for a miracle. There is only a road outside a small town in Lower Galilee, and a funeral procession coming through the gate, and Jesus walking toward it from the other direction. The town is called Nain. It sits about 6 miles from Nazareth, which means Jesus may have walked past it as a boy. He may have known the shape of its walls, the sound of its market, the smell of its bread on a Sabbath morning. This is not some distant foreign city. This is the neighborhood. And coming through the gate is a woman carrying the worst thing a woman in the ancient world could carry: her only son, dead. Stay with me, because the cultural weight of this moment is almost impossible to overstate. In first-century Jewish society, a woman without a husband and without a son had no legal standing, no financial security, and no one obligated to care for her. She could not inherit property the way a man could. She could not appear in court as a primary witness. She was dependent, entirely, structurally dependent, on the men in her family. And this woman has just lost the last one. She is not just grieving. She is watching her future disappear on a wooden board carried by 4 men through a city gate. Luke, the physician, the one gospel writer who notices women with particular care, tells us that a large crowd from the city was with her. The whole town had come out. And into the middle of this public, loud, grief-soaked procession, Jesus walks. He sees her. 2 words in the Greek, adon, auten. He saw her. Not the crowd, not the coffin, not the spectacle of civic mourning. He saw the woman. The specific, particular, exhausted, terrified woman whose world had just ended for the second time. And then Luke uses a word that should make you stop completely. Splachnizomai. It is one of the most visceral words in the entire New Testament. It comes from the Greek word for intestines, for the gut, the deep physical center of the body. When the gospel writers say Jesus felt splachnizomai, they are not saying he felt mild sympathy. They are not saying he felt politely concerned. They are saying the grief of this woman hit him somewhere below the throat and above the stomach, the place where real feeling lives, the place that tightens when you get bad news, the place that aches when someone you love is in pain. Jesus felt her grief in his body. And then he did something that would have made every person in that procession flinch. He touched the bier. In Jewish law, touching a dead body, or anything that had been in contact with a dead body, made you ritually unclean. You would have to go through a purification process. You would be excluded from worship. Every person in that crowd understood this. Every person in that crowd watched Jesus reach out and lay his hand on the wooden frame carrying the body of this woman's son. And the procession stopped. He did not ask permission. He did not explain himself. He did not give a theological preamble. He touched the bier, the procession stopped, and he said 4 words. "Young man, get up." And the dead man sat up and began to speak. Luke tells us that Jesus gave him back to his mother. That quiet, specific phrase, gave him back, not restored him to life, not performed a resurrection miracle, gave him back to her, as if the whole point was not the power, but the person, as if the miracle existed for the sake of one woman standing at a city gate with no future left. Fear seized the crowd. And then something shifted. They began to glorify God, saying, "A great prophet has appeared among us, and God has visited his people." God has visited his people. They did not fully understand what they were saying, but they were not wrong. Now pay attention to this, because the third story is different from the first two in every possible way. Jairus came to Jesus. The widow of Nain did not have to. But in both cases, by the time Jesus arrived, the person had been dead for hours at most. The girl was fresh. The young man was on his way to burial. What happens next in the Gospel of John is something else entirely. His name is Lazarus, and he has been dead for 4 days. 4 days matters more than you might think. In Second Temple Judaism, the religious world Jesus and his disciples lived in, there was a widespread belief that the soul of a dead person lingered near the body for 3 days after death. 3 days of hovering. 3 days of not quite gone. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, documents the burial customs of this era. The body wrapped in linen, anointed with spices, placed in a sealed tomb. The family sitting Shiva in mourning. And for 3 days, there was still a kind of proximity, a nearness. 4 days meant it was over. 4 days meant the soul had departed. 4 days meant even the most generous reading of Jewish hope did not reach this far. Lazarus is not mostly dead. Lazarus is not recently dead. Lazarus is, by every theological and biological and cultural standard available to his world, completely, finally, irreversibly dead. And Jesus, when he hears the news, waits 2 more days before he moves. This has confused readers for 2,000 years. Mary and Martha, Lazarus' sisters, had sent word to Jesus that their brother was sick. They clearly expected him to come immediately. And Jesus stays where he is for 2 more days. By the time he arrives in Bethany, Martha comes out to meet him on the road. And what she says is not angry. Or rather, it is angry in the way that only grief and love together can produce anger. She says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." If you had been here. 4 words that carry everything. The trust that he could have helped. The confusion that he did not come. The love that refuses to simply be polite about the loss. Martha is not performing faith. She is standing in the road with dirt on her clothes from sitting Shiva, and she is telling Jesus exactly what she thinks, which is that she needed him and he was not there. Jesus does not defend himself. He does not explain his timing. He does not offer a theological argument. He says something that is either the most important sentence in the Gospel of John or the most audacious claim any human being has ever made. I am the resurrection and the life. Not I can cause resurrection. Not I have access to resurrection power. Not resurrection is something God does and I can ask him. He says, I am the resurrection. Present tense, first person. The thing itself. Martha says she believes him, and then she goes to get her sister. Mary comes out of the house and falls at his feet. She says the same words her sister said. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Word for word. Which means these 2 women, in 4 days of grief, in 4 days of sitting on the floor of a house that used to have their brother in it, had said this sentence to each other, had rehearsed it, had turned it over and over in the dark, the way you turn over the thing you most wish you could say to the person who could have prevented the worst moment of your life. If you had been here. Jesus looks at her weeping. He looks at the crowd weeping around her. And then John uses the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. 2 words in English, 1 word in Greek, idokrusin. He cried. Not performed grief, not demonstrated appropriate sorrow for the benefit of the watching crowd. The God of the universe, standing in the dust outside a tomb in Bethany, cried real tears over a dead man he was about to raise back to life. This should stop you completely, because if Jesus knew, and he did know, he had already told his disciples they were going to Bethany so that Lazarus could be raised. If he already knew what was about to happen in the next 10 minutes, why did he weep? Here is the only answer that makes sense. He was not weeping for Lazarus. He was weeping for them. For Mary on the ground, for Martha on the road, for every person standing in that crowd who had ever loved someone and lost them and did not know if they would ever see them again. He was weeping for the sheer, brutal fact of death itself, for what it does to people, for the way it tears, for the specific grief of a world that was not supposed to work this way. He was not detached from the pain just because he had the power to stop it. For every person standing in that crowd who had ever loved someone and lost them and did not know if they would ever see them again. He was weeping for the sheer, brutal fact of death itself, for what it does to people, for the way it tears, for the specific grief of a world that was not supposed to work this way. He was not detached from the pain just because he had the power to stop it. The power did not protect him from the feeling. He felt it anyway. All of it. And then he asked where the tomb was. They said, "Lord, come and see." The tomb is a cave with a stone rolled across the entrance. The smell, Martha warns him, will be overwhelming. 4 days. She is not being dramatic. She is being accurate. And Jesus stands in front of a sealed cave that contains the decomposing body of his friend and says something that sounds, by any normal standard of human reasoning, completely unreasonable. Take away the stone. The crowd obeys. The stone rolls. And then Jesus lifts his eyes, not down into the darkness of the tomb, but up, and prays. Not a long prayer, not a formal prayer, a prayer that sounds almost like a conversation already in progress. Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me. And then he turns toward the tomb and raises his voice. Lazarus, come out! That is all. Not a ritual, not a formula, not a ceremony with incense and chanting and theological conditions, just a name, spoken into a dark cave by a man standing in the afternoon sun outside Bethany. And this is where it gets remarkable. He comes out, 4 days dead, 4 days past the boundary of what Jewish theology said was retrievable. 4 days into the silence that everyone in that crowd believed was permanent. And Lazarus walks out of his own tomb with the grave clothes still wrapped around him, the burial cloth still covering his face. Still bound, still wrapped, still carrying the marks of where he had been, but moving, breathing, alive. Jesus says to the crowd, "Unbind him, let him go." 3 words of command. And in those 3 words is an entire theology. Jesus raises him, but the community unbinds him. The miracle of resurrection and the work of restoration belong to different hands. Jesus gives life back. The people around him remove what death left behind. This is not a story about a number. This is not a story about a doctrine. This is not a story about a theological category called resurrection that belongs to the end of time and has nothing to do with your Tuesday afternoon. This is a story about a voice. The same voice that spoke to a 12-year-old girl in Aramaic. The same voice that stopped a funeral procession on a road outside Nain. The same voice that called into the dark mouth of a cave in Bethany and used 1 word, a name, to pull a man back from 4 days of death. And the people who heard it did what people always do when they hear it. They got up. There is a fourth resurrection in the Gospels, but nobody was there to watch it happen. No crowd, no weeping sisters, no synagogue ruler with dirt on his knees. Just a sealed tomb in a garden outside Jerusalem, soldiers posted at the entrance, and a silence so complete that the disciples had gone home and locked the door, and were sitting in the dark trying to figure out what to do next. And then, sometime before dawn on the first day of the week, the voice spoke again. Only this time, there was no one to command. This time, the voice and the body belonged to the same person. And the word egeiro, the Greek word the New Testament uses for resurrection, the word that means to rise, to be lifted, to stand, was not spoken by Jesus over someone else. It was spoken over him. He got up. Not as a resuscitation. Jairus' daughter and the widow's son and Lazarus all died again eventually. Their resurrections were extraordinary, but they were temporary. They were previews. What happened in that garden on the third day was something categorically different. A body transformed. A death defeated, not just delayed. The first fruits, Paul will call it. The first of a harvest that is still coming. The early church father Eusebius, writing in the 3rd century, records how the disciples who had locked themselves in that upper room were transformed within weeks into people who walked into public squares and announced the resurrection of Jesus to the same crowds who had watched him die. Something happened. Something so undeniable, so physical, so impossible to explain away, that frightened men became fearless ones. Eusebius notes they were willing to die for this claim, and most of them did. You do not die for a story you made up. You do not die for a vision or a feeling or a theological metaphor. You die for something you saw with your own eyes and cannot stop talking about, even when talking about it costs you everything. So here is what you take with you. The first thing is this. Jesus raised 3 people from the dead before his own resurrection, and in every single case, he saw the person before he acted. He saw Jairus. He saw the widow. He saw Mary on the ground. He saw Lazarus in the tomb. The miracles were not random demonstrations of power deployed at theological intervals. They were responses to people he was paying attention to. Which means the God of the resurrection is not a God of policies and procedures. He is a God who sees you, specifically, personally, by name, in the worst moment of your life. The second thing is this. Every person Jesus raised was given back to someone. The daughter to her parents, the son to his mother, Lazarus to his sisters. The resurrection power of Jesus is not abstract. It is relational. It moves toward the people who are left behind as much as toward the person who is gone. If you have ever stood at a graveside and felt that you were the one being buried, you were not wrong. Grief kills something in you. And the same Jesus who said, "Give her something to eat," who said, "Unbind him and let him go," is paying attention to what death has done to you, not just to the person you lost. The third thing, and this is the one that matters most, is the open loop we planted at the beginning of this video. There is a voice, and every person who has ever heard it has done the same thing. They got up. Talitha cum, little girl, get up. Young man, get up. Lazarus, come out. Do not be afraid, for I am the first and the last and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. That voice is not done. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15 that the resurrection of Jesus is the guarantee, the down payment, the first fruits of a resurrection still coming. That every person who has ever died in faith is Lazarus in the tomb, waiting. Not lost, not gone beyond retrieval. Waiting for the same voice that split the silence of that garden outside Jerusalem to speak one more time.